Hi crafty friends, I'm excited to share with you today a brand new scrapbooking workshop. This is using the gorgeous Elegant Pine Snowflake collection from Stampin Up. And the focus, or kind of the hero of this 6-page workshop, are the embellishment clusters. So there's going to be some stamping, some embossing, some specialty paper. As you can see here on the title, some ink blending. I loved the stamps and dies that went along with this collection called Delicate Pines, and I really wanted to bring those in as a focal point of these layouts. I'm also doing something that I've done before in my workshop guides and including some printable files. So there's going to be 2 sheets of printables in the guide. So you have some titling options, some journal options. We have some phrase strips that you can cut out. You can ink them up or just leave them white. I prefer to cut the black lines off of them and just have white edges, but you could leave those black lines on if you want to. There is an extra bonus title because I had room for it and I just couldn't decide if it Love This Day or Hello Winter was the one I wanted to use, so I included both for you. Now you can see here I have 3 of this shape here, and that's because I wanted to include the 2 different spellings of cozy depending on where you are in the world. And then I have a blank one because I layered up my title. So you can see here I have this back layer flat, and then for this one I cut just on the outside of that inner black line. See how we have an inner black line and an outer? I cut just on the outside of that and then did my ink blending and popped it up on top of this one, which I cut on the outside of this big solid black line. It makes for a really fun dimensional title, but also super easy to pull together. I tried to keep the shapes easy to hand cut, nothing too crazy and intricate, but of course you can always use your dies or your Cricut or something to create titles as well. You can probably see that little bit of twinkle going on. That is from the Faceted Snowflakes. These are really pretty little snowflake gems, and they add the perfect amount of little bit of bling. You can see one of those little phrase stickers here. I have ink blended very subtly along the edge, just enough to add a little bit of color to it. I've also inked all my edges with Secret C, my base page, the pattern paper. I didn't ink the edges of any of my embellishments, and I also didn't ink the edges of any of the Secret C cardstock because it's the same color, it won't really make a difference. But I've done the photo mats and all of my base layers. For pieces that are ripped, I like to rip them first and then ink along the edge. Now before I show you the other double page spreads that are in this workshop guide, I want to show you how these snowflakes came together because some of them I have stamped, some of them I have embossed, and there is a 2-step die cutting process you can use if you want to. So let's go ahead and have a look at that right now. So the main set that I'm using for this workshop is the Delicate Pines bundle. So stamp and die cut set, and there's so much in here to work with. It really is everything you would need. You could see all the stamps on here. These ones here can be used as standalone designs, or they can be used to fill in the centers of these bigger snowflakes. You really do have everything you need to create some really cool clusters. I didn't even utilize all the little bits and pieces. The coordinating die set that comes along with this, I have put onto a magnet sheet, and you can see there are lots of options here. We have outline dies. These ones here, these 2, they look kind of funny. They cut out the middles of the snowflakes, and I'm going to show you that. We have a layered pine cone. We have greenery. This is one of my favorite pieces. It just works so nice to create some movement for your clusters, and I use that one quite a bit. So I like to use my little anti-static embossing pouch whenever I'm embossing. I've gone ahead and put the medium snowflake on a block, and I'm just going to use my Versamark to stamp it. Then we'll cover it with white embossing powder. And if I'm doing a whole bunch at once, I like to stamp and add my embossing powder to a bunch all at the same time, and then I will heat up my heat tool and heat set all at once. That just makes it easier, and you only have to heat up your heat tool one time. I I do hold my heat gun off to the side, let it heat up before I bring it to paper so that I don't over melt the embossing powder, because it will kind of go flat and sink into the paper instead of sitting on the surface. Now the next step is going to be to take the outline die, line it up with the ends of those snowflake branches. I love how these snowflakes are so different from other snowflakes in my collection because all of them are created with like little pine branches. Then I'll just run this through my die cutting machine. And there is the first step of our snowflake. Now you can see the insides maybe look a little bit empty, but that is all right. That's what these little dies are for. So they actually fit perfectly into those openings, and we can die cut out those dark spaces in the center. You can also fill those dark spaces in with stamping. I will show you that on the next snowflake. I like to washi tape my dies into place so they stay where I put them. Isn't that beautifully delicate? With the Secret Sea color around the outside and then this in white, it just really pops. So that's what I've done on these ones here. This big one, I cut out the insides, the in-betweens. This one, because I layered another die cut over top, I didn't bother doing this last step and cutting those out because it was going to be covered anyways. Now you can get super creative with the colors that you're using to stamp. You can make all kinds of different colors and they can be two-tone. So I'm going to show you just stamping this with ink and what that looks like. So for the snowflakes that I used on this layout, I did alternate which colors I put together. You can see this big one here. I have garden green on the outside and shaded spruce on the inside. Here on this one, you can see I have shaded spruce on the outside, like the main part of the snowflake, and then the little inside is with garden green. I think this looks really cool. You could do it all in the same shade if you want to, for sure. And I'll show you that on one of the other layouts. I just love how easy it is to customize with these stamps. You can really do what works for you. And once we create a few pieces, then we can put it all together in a cluster. So once you've stamped your first layer, your main part of the snowflake, then we can go in with the inside part. And I usually find what's most helpful is to line up the 3 little berries that are in the center. It helps that these are clear stamps and you can look through them to help line them up. This looks a little bit dark because the inks are wet. They do lighten as they dry a bit, but that gives you a pretty good idea of what that looks like. So many beautiful details in these stamps. So let's go ahead and recreate this embellishment cluster that I did here so I can talk you through my process. First of all, you're limited by the amount of space you have. And you want to work around whatever your focal point is. And for me, my focal point is my journaling box. So that is the first thing that I want to put into place, figure out where that's going in relation to my photos, how much space I have to work with. And then that will affect what size of images I use, how far I tuck them underneath. If this was a smaller area, I could make everything just a little bit tighter and not go out as wide. Now this one is die cut in the middle, which I didn't do on this one, but this is the same stamp just without that die cutting in the middle. So place your focal point, and then I like to start with my biggest images first. So placing my large snowflake and kind of figuring out where I want that to go. And I think it always works well if everything is kind of touching each other. You don't have things just floating out in the middle of space. Everything needs to be close enough and overlapping so it looks like they belong together. So I could have this over here, kind of beside this, but not touching it, and it won't look as cohesive. Whereas if I overlap it even just a little bit, when it's touching that, it becomes a little bit more connected, for lack of a better word. Now I'm going to take this one that was stamped in shaded spruce and die cut, and that's going to go over the center right there. Now, in my initial arrangement, I did pop this one up. So this would be up on dimensionals. This one is flat. Everything else is going to be flat in this arrangement. So here we have some little pieces. They are all touching. My space is not overly big, so I don't want to get too many more things going, but my next step now are my leaves. These little branches, they are designed so that you can have them layered with your snowflakes and kind of make a snowflake design with them, and then you have a spot to adhere it in the middle. But for my purposes, I'm going to cut this off so that I have two little pieces like this. So when you see the cutting directions in the guide, I told you how many to cut of the die. So if I said 4, then you cut this 4 times, then you cut it apart, and you're going to have 8 pieces to work with. All right, so let's go with our bigger leaves first. That's usually what I like to do. So we have our main elements first, and then I kind of want to wrap this around. That's why I love the curve, and ideally I would love one that curves the opposite way, because then when you do the bottom, you could have that and they just kind of wrap right around. But since I don't, usually what I like to do is just, just kind of go something like that. And then we will add a third point of this green and just tuck it under here. A lot of building clusters is just adding a few things, seeing where you have gaps, seeing where there's kind of empty looking spaces, which you can go in and layer more pieces there. So I ended up going and layering this here. I could have also layered in kind of overlapping like that. There really isn't a wrong way I could layer this over here, but I end up settling on overlapping these two together. And then this one's gonna come over here and fill in a little bit of a hole right there. You can see on my layout here, this would look a little bit empty without my pine cones. So I cut these from the Earthen metallic specialty paper. I love this paper. I cannot get enough of it. It's like this bronzy color, and it's a nice switch up from like a gold or a silver foil. And I didn't bother cutting the solid part of the pine cones because I thought these would look great just the way they are. I quite often like doing 2 pine cones together. You'll see on my other pages, I have some where I put 3, 2 together and 1 by itself. But you can play with that and just kind of fill in the little gap at the bottom. Now, when it comes to gluing everything down, sometimes I'll take a picture of it and then I will look at the picture when I'm reassembling. Another thing I like to do is I just take my Barely Art glue with the nice fine tip on it, and I will go around, just peel it up, squirt a little bit of glue in a few places, and not even really move my pieces too much, especially on something like this big snowflake, right? You don't need to glue the whole thing. Just squirt some glue under there. You don't even have to see what you're doing, and then press it down. I hope that's helpful for you when you go to start building your clusters. Of course, you have my photos to look at. I always include close-up photos of the clusters in the guide so that you can see them. Speaking of which, how about we look at the next layout? Here is layout number 2. So this is a little bit different. I have white cardstock on this side, and then I have this really nice, deep, bold pattern on the other side. You can see all the pine snowflakes on the background there. If you wanted fewer snowflakes, there is another piece in here that we didn't use that has just like pine branches and berries, not arranged in snowflakes, just as an overall background, and it has a dark background too, so you could interchange those if you want to. I wanted to make a page that coordinated, so you can see I have white as my background here, and then a white layer going around my photos. Here I have this pattern over on here, just to tie them in together. I have inked the edges of all my pieces, not my die cuts, but all the rest of the pieces with Secret C again. And then in the background here, I actually stamped the snowflakes with Secret C. And you can see on the big one here, I did stamp the outer and the inner part with the same color. And I'm going for just kind of like a cascade of snowflakes up this side and then kind of out this side. It looked a little too empty without it, and I just can't get enough of those beautiful snowflakes. I have another little like half die cut snowflake here, and that is something a little bit different on this layout. We are bringing in snowflakes cut from the pattern paper. So that's another bonus of these dies. These 2 sizes of dies actually cut out the snowflakes from the pattern paper, and I will show you that in a second. But that way you don't have to do any stamping or anything. They are perfectly colored to match the paper because they are part of the paper. And it makes building clusters super fast and easy. So you can see I have more of the greenery. I've switched up some of the colors. I've shaded spruce and garden green over here. There's the 3 pine cones I was telling you about. I have a group of 2 and a single one over here by that leaf. And I think that balances out well. These little mini snowflakes are actually from the same pattern paper as well, and are a great way to kind of extend the cluster along with my little faceted snowflake gems. I want to show you the ink blending that I did on this title, but first I'll give you a close-up look at this side. I have ink blending here on my little journaling card, and then a snowflake tucked behind. A cute little kind of mini cluster on here, and then a big one on this side. If you'd like to get your hands on the guide that has all the cutting diagrams, photos, directions, you can get the guide if you are within Canada. You can get it by placing an order on my Stampin' Up website of $80 or more before tax and shipping. Or you can join my Crafty Hearts team and you will get all of my guides and my downline Julie Carrier's guides for free. So that's a new guide every single month that you can use for your personal scrapbooking or in your business. And for my friends that are outside of Canada, you can buy from the link down in the description box below. I don't have an auto send feature, so give me about 24 hours to send your guide out to you after you pay for it. And then that should give you everything you need to complete these pages. Now let's go ahead and do a little bit of ink blending. First off, before we ink blend, we need to cut out our pieces. So what I like to do is just rough cut out my pieces like this to get them out of the main sheet so they're easier to handle. And if you're not much of a fussy cutter, hopefully these will be easy enough for you. But what you want to do is stick just to the outside of that thick black line. Put the blade of your scissors up to the edge of the paper and then turn your paper as you're cutting. Instead of turning your scissors, turn the paper with your other hand. Now, when you come up to a part where you're going to be turning a corner, the way to get that smooth is to be cutting. So I'm slowly closing the blades of my scissors. I am moving my paper around, kind of like rotating it. And this gives me the smoothest cut, especially on rounded areas, which can be a little bit more tricky. Squared off edges, it's a little bit more straightforward, I guess. And you can always go back, clean up a little bit. If you end up with some white areas that are bothering you, you can take a black marker and just fill those in. But just take your time, don't try and go too quickly. And I think you'll find it's not too bad. All right, there is our little piece cut out. Now I'm going to add just a little bit of adhesive to the back of this, and I'm gonna stick it down to my mat. I like working on either a glass mat or some sort of craft mat when I'm inking. I'm going to add 2 different greens on here, so I have 2 different brushes. Old Olive is going to be my lighter shade. Never hurts to have a little piece of scrap paper where you can come in, just test out the brush, see how it's going. I always try and start my brush off the edge of my piece so that I'm not having this where there's like little marks and stuff right on my piece of paper. And this I'm going to keep fairly light because I'm going to bring the depth in with the next one. So you have a couple options here. You can either leave it white in the center, or you can bring it all the way through just very lightly. Just depends how much of a highlight you want in the center of your piece. For my second green color, I'm going to bring in Garden Green. I'm going to do the same thing, just starting off the edge. You can see this is a lot more intense, which is good because we want that depth around the outside. And then I just have to be careful not to bring it in too far, because otherwise I will lose that highlight in the center. So you can see how fast and easy those inks build up color. You can keep layering if you want to, but I think that is good for me. You can see we have that nice bright highlight in the middle, but it's not pure white. Now something like my title here on the first one, I used shaded spruce and I brought it in from the bottom, just like I showed you on the edge of this one. and just let it fade up. Probably about the top third is white on mine, and I just let it fade as I got towards the top. So I still had a nice bright top on there, and then just kept layering around the bottom until I got it how dark I wanted it. Same thing here for my little journaling spot. I used garden green ink. Just started it off on my mat, just like I showed you here, and then just brought it on a little ways. I really took it easy on this because it's easy to get a ton of ink on there really fast. Same with my little strips. I actually used just whatever was left over on my blending brush to add a little bit along one side of these little strips. And then I inked the whole outside with the Secret Sea color. My preference when I'm doing my edges is to use something like a mini ink blending tool or a dauber, and just to come in with the ink right on the edge like this. That's how I did most of my edges on all of my layers, just with Secret Sea and bringing in just right on the edge. I didn't want to bring it in too far, especially when I have several layers very close together. This one back here is garden green cardstock, and if I bring the ink in too far, you really lose that green pretty quickly. If I want to bring ink in farther from the edge, like I did on this page, my go-to is definitely a blending brush, and that is what I used on here because you can really bring it in nice and soft, starting on your mat and working your way inwards. Now let's have a look at this paper. This is the design that I used for all of my snowflakes. I used up quite a bit of it, die cutting them. And in the directions, I did tell you which ones I used because some have like shaded spruce in the middle, some have old olive in the middle. I did distinguish between the two. It's really not necessary. If you wanted to cut up your whole piece and just die cut everything so you have tons of extra, you can just go for it. It doesn't have to be as specific, but I thought I would include that detail in case some of you really care about that. Now, when it comes to die cutting this paper, there's a lot of these little ones in here, and those actually cut out with this little die. And I used several of these on my page as well. So you really have to be careful when you're going around and cutting this apart. So you can see we have these in here. These little sprigs, I just ignored those. I believe they do cut out with this die, but they are just so tiny. And it was more important to me to get the larger snowflakes. So I just go in, cut around, and once in a while you will have a loss where you accidentally cut into one of them, but there's tons of the little ones, so I wouldn't worry so much about that. And then you just line up your die. I would use washi tape to hold it in place. And if you have room, you could do 2 at a time, do like a mini and this one, but you have to make sure your dies are not overlapping, because if they overlap in your die cut machine, then that does ruin them. So you can go in, cut your pieces apart, and then just die cut them separately, but it really helps speed things up if you don't want to stamp everything and you want some that are just perfectly matching the collection. You can also use the little half ones here at the edge. I believe the one I used here was a partial, and then the one I used here was a partial as well. And then the other partial one I used, I think, is on the third layout. So let's pull that in and have a look. Here is layout number 3. So that partial snowflake I was telling you about is this one that's down in this bottom section here. Don't be afraid to bring in those partial snowflakes. They are great for building out clusters. This one you can see I did a ton of ripping on here. I did use white cardstock as my bases just to break up some of the busyness. This piece here is actually not in the directions. It is the backside of this piece. So I ripped my pieces on an angle. So one end is narrower. So here the top end is narrower and then the bottom end is wider. And then that extra piece that I ripped off here, I flipped it over, inked the edge and tucked it over here. I also did some stamping. So the thing that I found to do this background stamping right on my base page, the easiest thing was to lay my strips out, lay a couple of my larger pieces. I have a tag here, and that one is cut with the pattern tags die. I used the plain tag and this little bow die. I love this little bow. I cut that out of the Earthen metallic. Just glued the 3 layers together and it creates such a cute bow. And I did use wood grain paper. You might have noticed that on one of the other layouts. This is from the Country Woods collection. I love wood grain, especially with winter layouts, so I just had to bring it in. I thought it went so nicely with this collection. You could use whatever wood grain you have in your collection, but the Country Woods pack is an excellent option, and it's one of those that is on permanent rotation in my craft room. It's in the annual catalog, so it was around last year, and it's around all year this year as well. So it's a great option, kind of like a staple to have in your collection. So once you lay out your strips kind of where they're going, and then you have your title and your tag and maybe your large snowflake, gives you a good idea of how much space this is going to take up. I did include measurements in the guide of how far away these things are from the edges, so you can kind of use that as a guide as well. And then I went ahead and I stamped. Now I stamped in 2nd generation Secret C. So that means I inked it up, I stamped it on scrap paper, and then I stamped it on my page. So it's a little bit lighter. I'll show you the difference here on this layout. That is the full strength Secret C. This is the 2nd generation. And you can see how it's just that little bit lighter, a little bit softer, more in the background. So I have a large one, a medium one, another medium one, and then a couple of these smaller images just to fill in. I wanted this to taper, so kind of wider here in the middle and then taper off towards the edges. Here is my little cluster down here, another little phrase sticker. More of those faceted gems. They do come in 3 colors in this pack, but I stuck with the clear on this layout. I thought they popped against the blues a lot better. All my edges are inked. I did all my ripping first and then inked my edges. I just love this pattern. I believe it was achieved with like watercolor and salt. I shared that technique recently in the Creative Design Team membership, how to recreate that for yourself, and I just think it's such a fun one. I also showed ideas using that in the 31 Days of Christmas cards, which just came to an end, is now available for replay. If you guys missed out on that and want to learn a bunch of new techniques and make a bunch of Christmas cards. You see here I have an embossed snowflake. I have another little mini one that's popped up. I popped this strip up as well on Dimensionals. And then I did more of that background stamping over here. So same thing where it's wider at this end and then tapers off. And I did the same thing to my papers where this snowflake pattern, I left it wide at the bottom and then ripped on an angle so it was narrower at the top, and you see how it just disappears behind this one. And then I did the reverse for this greenery pattern. So I left it wider at the top and then ripped it more narrow towards the bottom. So you can see that down here, how it gets really narrow at the bottom. Now you can't see that detail as much as you can over here, but that's okay. I just like kind of the unevenness it provides on the layout. It makes it a little bit more organic. And then these pieces, I ripped them as well, but I just ripped them straight. Here's a closer look at this cluster down here. You can see I have an embossed, medium-sized snowflake. I have one of those little minis, a couple of large ones, another medium, an embossed mini snowflake, and of course my greenery going around. I did not bring in the old olive leaves. I felt like I had enough going on here, and I really leaned in more to like the frosty snowflake feel on this one. The title is ink blended using Pretty Peacock. So I didn't use any other colors, just Pretty Peacock. Same thing, starting at the bottom, blending upwards, except I didn't leave it white at the top. I just have a lighter version of that color. So as the ink was coming off my brush, it just naturally got lighter towards the top. And then I come back to the bottom and just layer on more ink just around the bottom. I hope you enjoyed seeing this workshop, and you can find all the links you need down in the description box. Whether you're in Canada and you're placing an order or joining my team to get the guides, or if you are outside Canada and you're making a purchase, all those links are down there. If you want to see some of the past workshops that I have designed that are still available, you can click here on this playlist, and I will see you again soon with another video.